What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic channel. And today we're talking college football DFS, week 3, Saturday, the main slate. We have 13 games to get into. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We are also brought to you today by BetMGM, and they have a phenomenal offer for you guys, a limited time offer. So if you're sports bettors, what you're going to do is head to BetMGM. Then if you bet $10 on any football game, you are automatically going to win $200 if either team scores a touchdown. To take advantage of this, click the link in the video description below. It is a huge bankroll booster. It is literally $200 free dollars. So make sure to take advantage of that. And thank you to BetMGM. And let's dive into this. We have 13 games. We'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. And couple housekeeping notes. This is our data sheet I'm showing you on the screen behind the scenes. I want to explain it at least a little bit beforehand. Up at the top, you are seeing game-by-game data. So the slate, that's just whatever DFS slate they're on, main slate for this game. We'll talk about it in a second. Plays per game, that is 2022 data. So you can see Cincinnati's running 63.7 plays per game. They're passing the ball 59.7% of the time. Offensive line, that means they're allowing 3 sacks per game. Defensive line, that means they're generating 2 sacks per game. Then you have your Vegas data. Passing yards allowed. So the D means defensive. That means Cincinnati is allowing 223 pass yards per game. That is 8.6 yards per attempt. Then on the ground, they're allowing 224 yards per game. That is 5 yards per attempt. That's coming against Arkansas, of course. So just for reference against Cincinnati. Their defense is a little better than that, but just to understand the statistics, and that'll be the same whether you click to the next game, Purdue, Syracuse, any of the games down the line. That is what those statistics mean. Everything below that, we have our player usage data. I'm going to be discussing this at length now, and we can kick this off with Cincinnati, Miami, Ohio, the first game on the slate. Minus 22 in favor of Cincinnati. Looks like there's a little error here. It says minus 22 both ways. It's plus 22 for Miami, Ohio. I'll change that behind the scenes, so don't worry. Still early in the year. We'll see a couple little bugs occasionally, but I'll fix this. Total's 51. Not the greatest for this slate. Not terrible. Cincinnati has a pretty good implied team total because they're such a heavy favorite. And we've actually seen pretty good returns from Ben Bryant to start the year. He's averaging nearly 270 yards per game. Not mobile whatsoever, but Cincinnati has been passing the ball at a pretty high rate, and they should have no problem with efficiency in this game. Ben Bryant is averaging 8.5 yards per attempt, nearly 68% completion percentage, threw over 300 yards against Arkansas. A lot of that production did come when the main players, Slusher and Catalan, were out on defense. But still, sometimes it does take shootouts to coax these kind of performances out of Cincinnati signal callers. Last year, Ritter wasn't always the best in these kind of games just because Cincinnati will sit on their lead. They don't run the most plays per game. So there is a little bit of worry here with Ben Bryant, but he's an okay price-adjusted play. The backfield's been a mess. Ryan Montgomery is projected to come back from injury. He's the most expensive. But I think if you're taking a shot, Corey Kiner's the guy. He leads the backfield in carries, but Charles McClelland has one more touch than him. It's a 4-way committee. Tough to really bank on any of these guys with any confidence. And then in the receiving game, Tyler Scott's probably the guy you're looking at. 7.5 targets per game. But nobody on this team averages more than 62 yards per game. That honor belongs to Tyler Scott. Maybe you could look at a GPP, Trey Tucker, or Jaden Thompson. Will Paulding is out of this game. So the second receiver in targets, Paulding, he's tied with Wiley. Paulding is out. That should just elevate Trey Tucker, Jaden Thompson. Then at tight end, it's a timeshare between Wiley and Leonard Taylor. Not too much to really look at here. The prices on these guys aren't great. You're going to find better price-adjusted options, but that should come with reduced ownership. I don't hate a contrarian Cincinnati stack. Miami, Ohio is really hard to get to. They lost their quarterback, Brett Gabbert. Avion Smith is a dual threat guy, but we haven't seen a lot from him, just 37 yards rushing so far. His passing statistics, they came against Robert Morris, so 7 yards per attempt, 63.5% completion. What is that going to look like against Cincinnati, who's just much, much better than Robert Morris? I have serious questions, so I won't be playing Avion Smith at this price. Backfield's a disaster, too. It's a timeshare. You're going to see maybe 5 guys. Keon Mosey, Jalen Bester, Kevin Davis, Kenny Tracy, Tyree Shelton, all play. Tough to play any of them. If you do want to run back, it's probably Mac Hippenhammer, 28% target share. He's averaging 68.5 yards per game. I think he's fine. Walker would be a cheaper run back, but I'm not getting any weirder than that. I'm sticking with just Hippenhammer Walker. Middling game to target, more going to look to shots on the Cincinnati side, probably not stacking the game in general. Game 2, exact opposite. Purdue, Syracuse, spread is 2.5. It's moving to 2 in some spots in favor of Syracuse. The total is also taking money. I've seen this as high as 60 in some spots. So watch the total. This is a sneaky shootout game and maybe not so sneaky now that the money is coming in on the over. Aiden O'Connell is a pure pocket passer. He's averaging 288 passing yards per game on 39.5 attempts. Most of that coming via week 1. He's not mobile, but the passing volume is there for O'Connell, and this has shootout written all over it. He also has the players you can stack him with. If you look to the receivers, Charlie Jones, he's averaging 14 targets per game, 143 yards. DraftKings priced him way up for good reason at $8K. He has double-digit targets in both games. He's going to be a little contrarian, I think, because that price is exorbitant, but we've seen what he can do. He has an awesome role. But, I mean, it's not just Charlie Jones. Tyrone Tracy's involved. He's averaging 4.5 targets per game. Payne Durham, their tight end, he had 8 targets in week 1 against Penn State. Mershawn Rice, 8 targets. TJ Sheffield, 7 targets. Brock Thompson, battling an injury. I don't think we see him, but maybe he returns to this. What I'm trying to say is there are tournament pivots away from Charlie Jones if you would like to get there. The backfield is a little more confusing, I think. King Doru is going to miss this game. Dylan Downing looked like the backup, but former walk-on Devin Maccabee actually played really well in their most recent game. They also have the Central Michigan transfer Kobe Lewis there. This could honestly devolve into a timeshare, which we've seen Purdue historically run. So I do have my questions with this offense overall. If I'm targeting anybody here, it's Charlie Jones as the expensive option, or I'm going to probably just go all the way down to Payne Durham at 4K. If you look at week 1's routes, Charlie Jones, of course, led the way, but Payne Durham was at 76%. Then you had TJ Sheffield, 68%. Brock Thompson, 60%. Mershawn Rice was at 42%. And Tyrone Tracy, just 27%. So I think with the receivers likely to rotate to some degree, you can get a full-time player in Payne Durham. He's a solid pivot, in my opinion. Syracuse, and this Syracuse offense is way different than last year. They got Robert Anae from Virginia as their OC. And before we go all the way over, I want to highlight 74 plays per game for Syracuse. Yes, we know Purdue's already running really fast, and they're playing with a very high pass rate. That's what they've done historically. But Syracuse now, 74 plays per game. Virginia last year ran at the speed of light, and they passed a ton. Now, the quarterback situation is different with Syracuse, so I don't think they pass quite as much, but they should have a ton of plays per game. Garrett Schroeder has been unbelievable to start the year. 6,400 is an incredibly cheap price. Just looking on the back end and projections, he's one of the top price-adjusted signal callers in the slate. Given his mobility, he has nearly 120 rushing yards. That's 60 yards per game so far. That's a hallmark of the Garrett Schroeder game. He's very mobile. And then this offense has coaxed elevated efficiency out of him. Now, they did play UConn, but he had a solid game against Louisville, who's not a walkover in terms of defense, certainly not in the elite category. But Schroeder, excellent game so far. He's averaging 265.5 passing yards. The floor he gives you on the ground just increases his viability here. He's an awesome play. You also have Sean Tucker in the backfield. 8,900 is really expensive for him, but the guy has 30 touches per game so far this year. And those were an extremely positive game scripts. If this is more competitive, Sean Tucker, he might even see further work. They're really only using LaQuint Allen as the backup. LaQuint Allen has just 12 touches. They haven't had another back touch the ball. It is just Sean Tucker, averaging over 100 yards per game on the ground. Excellent receiving back. We've seen it over multiple years. He's currently the team's leading receiver. Just unbelievable production. If you can afford him, he's fine. If you go to the pass game, this is kind of tough to target. They've rotated a little bit here, but I think we've seen a preference towards Oronde Gadsden. Don't know why that name is so tough for me, but Oronde Gadsden, He is the 4th most targeted receiver on the team, tied for 3rd, actually, 6 targets, 81 yards. But the routes do favor him. Once you get behind Gadsden, you're looking at a lot of rotation here. Isaiah Jones had a 56% route rate in week 1. That was just ahead of Gadsden, who was at 53%. Devon Cooper actually led the team in routes that week with 68% of the routes, but then they dropped in week 2. Gadsden's been the only one with a lot of consistency among the routes. So if I'm prioritizing these guys, it's probably Gadsden number 1. He is the most expensive. Then Devon Cooper. And then once you get below these guys, it is very dicey. Damian Alford's actually had a good route rate, but just 3 targets, so he's not targeted very often. I'd like to see a larger sample out of Syracuse. You're going to have stacking opportunities and GPP opportunities like Courtney Jackson and Isaiah Jones are both players that have played middling routes. They've been both below 50%. Jackson's been at 44%, 43%. Jones was at 56 in week 1, but then he dropped to 23 in week 2. So you can take shots with these guys in tournaments. They're going to rotate a lot, so whoever scores the touchdowns is going to be very viable. But again, just to recap, I'm going to rank Gadsden 1 and Devon Cooper 2 for now, closely followed by Jackson and Damian Alford. Top situational breakdown. Game 3, Western Kentucky takes on Indiana, 61.5 total. Great total here. 6.5 points spread. Indiana has an enormous implied team total comparatively where we've seen them in the past. Western Kentucky's not running the same offense they did last year. Their pass rate has dropped from in the 70% down to nearly 52%, which is still good. And their plays per game have also plummeted, and that's a concern considering their level of competition has not been great, and now they face a Big Ten team. Austin Reed, the West Florida transfer, has come in and played reasonably well. He's averaging 273.5 passing yards per game, 41 rushing yards. The thing is, he just projects worse. Take pricing out of it. He projects worse than Garrett Schroeder. So, outside of tournaments, it's tough to play a lot of these guys more expensive than Schroeder. He's just a supreme value on the slate. But in tournaments, you got to at least look at these stacks. They're also not running 4 wide as much here. So you're looking at top 3 receivers in Dawood Davis, Malachi Corley, and then some combination of Michael Matheson and Jalen Hall. It hasn't been the most consistent for them in this regard. Matheson's at a 57% route rate. So you can see they're not using as much 4 wide. And then Dawood Davis and Malachi Corley, they're very clearly the top 2 plays here. Davis should be the preference. He's the only one who's at any efficiency. 202 receiving yards. The next highest is Malachi Corley at 73. Maybe a buy low, but his price is exorbitant. Just play Davis if you're playing anyone. Jalen Hall is active, like only 5 targets in the year, but his route rate is north of 80%. So maybe he's just going to be their win sprinter. Maybe he sees more targets in the future. I'm just playing Dawood Davis. Running back room, very split. You're seeing Davion Irving Poindexter with most of the work. He has 26 touches, but Kyle Robichaud and Jakari Moses are involved, 14 and 13 touches apiece for them. No efficiency whatsoever. They haven't even gotten to 100 yards cumulatively. Not a good spot to target them against Indiana. Connor Basilic. Now, Indiana's a bit of a tough evaluation here. They're passing 67% of the time, 70.5 plays per game. The pass rate likely falls when they're in positive game script, which is the case here. But they've still shown a decent preference to pass the ball. So Connor Basilic, averaging 263.5 passing yards per game, not going to give you anything on the ground. So yes, he's not as attractive as Schroeder, but for stacks, given his team total, he could be a contrarian option. Cam Camper, the JUCO transfers, had an awesome role. He's a 36% target share, averaging almost 100 yards per game. He's had target counts of 17 and 11. Tons of opportunity for Camper. DJ Matthews, their little slot receiver, former Florida State guy. He's the second receiver on the team, 7.5 targets per game, 80 yards. I think he is fine. Only 3 targets in their most recent game. Wouldn't worry about that. He's plenty involved. And then wide receiver 3, this is a spot I'm probably not going to target. AJ Barner's actually a tight end. He's on the field a lot, but you're looking at some sort of rotation between Anderson Kobe, Emery Simmons. I'll just play the top 2 guys. They're cheap enough, especially Camper. Camper is an excellent play at this price. The backfield's also very interesting. They've given Sean Shevers an enormous workload. Not one I expected either, but this guy has now received 15 and 20 carries in back-to-back games. He's averaging 19.5 touches per game, 91.5 rushing yards, and he's somewhat active in the pass game. He has 4 targets there, 2 per game. No other running back has more than 2 targets on the team. This team hasn't targeted running backs a lot, only 6 total targets. So Shevers accounts for 2/3 of those. If they do end up passing to the backs more, it is Shevers. The snaps are dominant his way, routes dominant his way. He's a pretty good play at this price. It's risky targeting an Indiana back, but he's a good play overall. Georgia, South Carolina. 24 point spread. It's moving to 24.5 in some spots, 53.5 total. The over's taking money here as well. It's ticked up. I'm seeing some 55s currently. Georgia, if they can keep, I guess I should say, if their opponents can keep games close, their offense is going to be awesome this year. We've seen some stark changes year over year, and this echoes what Kirby Smart and company have spoken about in the offseason. Kirby sounded a little worried about recruiting the elite talent, the guys Alabama gets, the upper echelon receivers that the SEC has now gotten with these offenses they're running out. So he wanted to make some changes, go to a pass heavier scheme, more downfield attacking. Todd Monken's their OC. He's done that historically, and they did that against Oregon. So I'm a little optimistic. If they continue to do that, Stetson Bennett's a value right now. 7,300, 334 yards per game. He's been over 300 yards in both games now. FCS team in week 2, but Bennett clobbered Oregon, and he was able to do so through efficiency, over 10 yards per attempt, -5 rushing yards on the year. He's pretty mobile. Don't worry about that. More times than not, he's going to be in the positives. And you can stack him. Players really at all price points. The expensive player, Brock Bowers, only 7 targets this year. Wouldn't worry about it. His snaps and routes are going to rise in competitive games. Ladd McConkey, same with him. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 this year, it looks like. I don't think they're going to play with Adonai Mitchell, which is important. That means you could see more Kearis Jackson. You could see Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. These are players to maybe take shots on, very cheap. Kearis Jackson in particular, 4,200 is a nice price on him. I'm going to take shots on these Georgia pass catchers as long as they're cheap and in this range. And, maybe even a Dylan Bell, 53% of the routes last week. Wouldn't make too much of that, but he was on the field a lot in their most recent contest. They also use 2 tight ends a lot. You're going to see a lot of Bowers on the field with Darnell Washington. Darnell Washington actually had a 59% route rate in week 1. Yes, that came at the expense of Arik Gilbert. Arik Gilbert, he's just not it, man. There was so much hype after his freshman season that was fueled by volume, not efficiency. He's having trouble getting on the field, which is a huge issue. He should transfer. Anyway, South Carolina. Oh, we got to talk running backs. It's a timeshare. Now, Kenny McIntosh, he only has 33 yards this year on the ground, but he leads the team in touches with 26. He is expensive. Kendall Milton's been their pure banger back, sort of your replacement to Zamir White. Like Zamir White and James Cook were last year, these guys are dart throws based on efficiency. The volume's not going to be there. They're going to rotate 3, 4, sometimes 5 running backs into the game, but they can score a lot of touchdowns. South Carolina is a team I'm probably avoiding. Their offensive line has been atrocious, and it has affected the efficiency of Rattler. He has 38.5 attempts per game, 304 yards. That's great. He's going to backdoor you 300 yards in easier matchups. Georgia's not that. The efficiency is also affecting his rushing. The offensive line, they're allowing a ton of sacks. He's taken 8 in 2 games, 4 sacks per game. He used to be mobile with Oklahoma, but -35 rushing yards. That is going to be a real detriment here against Georgia. I'm not playing Rattler. Antwain Wells has emerged as their wide receiver 1. If you want to look for a run back on the other side, he's cheap enough at 5,200. He's the guy I would look at. Maybe you could use the contrarian Stogner. Still, he only has 49 yards on the year. Jalen Brooks, he has 117, but these guys both have 7 targets. That's not going to get it done. Unfortunately, Jaheim Bell, I think their most explosive playmaker, has been neutered to a degree where he's not usable. They're using him like Deebo Samuel. He has 7 and 4 carries, but it's come at the expense of his receiving role, and that is where we saw the efficiency come from last year. So if he's being used as a runner and not so much as a receiver, that really hurts Bell. The only thing that makes me optimistic this will change is they might get Christian Beal-Smith back. So you might have a third running back in here. You don't need to use Bell as a running back. Get him the ball in space. Please, South Carolina. You can't play Bell right now. Oklahoma, Nebraska, 67.5 total. My goodness, this has shootout written all over it. 11-point spread in favor of the Sooners. We know what's going on with Nebraska. Scott Frost gets canned. Honestly, this could be decent for DFS. When you listen to Mark Whipple talk, their new OC, former Pitt OC, we saw what he did with Pickett and Addison. Whipple's been speaking, and I think he's been saying the right things. Scott Frost has had his hands in this offense negatively. Now, Whipple should be unleashed, pass heaviness, running as many plays as he wants. That's going to benefit this offense, but we'll talk about them in a second. What I'm trying to say here is it's a great game environment. Now, on the Oklahoma side, Lebby, their OC, he should finally unleash this offense. He's the former Ole Miss OC, runs a ton of plays. He will tailor his offense to the skill players he has. We've seen him be either really pass heavy, or last year, Ole Miss was fairly run heavy. I think they're balanced this year. They've been run heavy to start the year, but again, they haven't played anybody competent yet. Now they play Nebraska. So this is going to be the toughest opponent they've faced thus far. Dillon Gabriel, he's still campaigning to maybe like take a Heisman shot here. He's a dark horse in that regard. Somewhat mobile. He rarely finishes with negative yards, but he's not your traditional dual threat. He's averaging 265.5 passing yards per game. Again, I think that's more opponent related than Gabriel struggles himself. He's been historically extremely efficient, and he's only throwing the ball 26 times per game. That's going to increase in competitive games. Easy to stack. You have the elite options, Marvin, Mims, and Theo Whis. Mims is averaging 122 yards per game. Whis would be just a strict pivot off of him. The players beyond that are pretty hard to evaluate at this point. I need to see more competitive games before I anoint one of these guys, the wide receiver 3. I think Braden Willis is honestly the most consistent option of these guys, and he's a tight end. His route rates are 96 and 73%. For reference, like Jaleel Farouk, he's been really involved, 85% route rate, 76% route rate, but 5 targets, 9 receiving yards. Is he at risk of potentially losing snaps to Drake Stoops? I mean, maybe it's a small sample size. You can look to Jaleel Farouk at 5K, but he is dicey at this point. I'm still not willing to play Stoops. I'll just play Farouk and Braden Willis over Drake Stoops, but these cheaper options do get a little risky. In the run game, Eric Gray saw some of his opportunity taken from him. That was what we saw with him last year with Kennedy Brooks. Javante Barnes is a player they've given a fair amount of opportunities now. The only issue is Gray handles the pass work. That is his role. You're not going to see him lose that. But last week, Gray only touched the ball 11 times to Barnes 8 times. Marcus Major's also involved. He has more touches altogether than Barnes. So my worry here is this devolves into a timeshare. But right now, based on the matchup, the play volume, and the game environment, Gray is still a dart throw in tournaments. I don't think he's cash viable tournaments exclusively. On the Nebraska side, we talked about Whipple potentially unleashing the offense. That should benefit Casey Thompson, who's cheap enough to target here. He's already averaging nearly 290 passing yards per game, 33 attempts. Again, I think there's good reason to think the 33 attempts per game increase. 11 rushing yards. Again, he's not the most mobile, similar to Gabriel, but he rarely finishes with negative yards. A surprise to me is Nebraska has essentially fully committed to Anthony Grant as their mainstay at running back. 23.7 touches per game. He's averaging 140 rushing yards. He's active in the pass game. 4 targets on the season. That leads the team. Again, this Nebraska team is not one of the teams that targets the running back at the highest rate here. And that's kind of been a staple of Whipple offenses in the past. But if they keep this semi-close, you're looking at a spot where Anthony Grant, just volume-wise, is seeing some of the best overall opportunity on the slate. Ajayi Allen is a change of pace back. He's averaging 8 touches per game. Again, Grant at 23.7. In the receiving game, you have 2 clear options on the field almost every snap in Trey Palmer and Marcus Washington. Palmer, he has been more targeted, 8.3 targets per game. Washington's at 5 targets per game, but Washington's more efficient on a per target basis. Overall, Palmer, he's averaging 77 yards per game. Washington at 60.3. They're both really cheap. No issues whatsoever playing these guys. I think they're very strong plays. You certainly want to be looking at them as run backs to your Oklahoma stacks. And I think you can stack Nebraska as well in this game environment. Completely fine with that. The wide receiver 3 has not been consistent for this team. I think there is room for one of these guys to grow. And if I'm placing my chips on any of them, it's Allante Brown. Here are his route rates. 39% in week 1. I guess week 0 technically. 60% in week 1. 74% in week 2. His routes are on the rise, coming at the expense of Isaiah Garcia Castaneda. And his targets are also on the rise. He saw 5 targets in their most recent game. 87 yards in the year. I'll take some shots with Allante Brown for sure in this offense. Outside of that, I don't think I'm getting anywhere near some of these other guys. Castaneda's routes have dropped to 26%. Really tough to get to there. South Alabama, UCLA. A fun game, 59.5 total. Not as bad as you might think. And let me tell you, South Alabama has been a team that's, they play in the Sun Belt Conference that's upsetting everyone. This team, it's not dead here. They're live to score some points. I don't think they win, but their team total is 22. They run 73 plays per game. They're balanced in terms of pass rate. I think this team has an outside chance to put up some production here. Carter Bradley, the Toledo transfer, is their signal caller. Beat out Desmond Trotter, surprise to me. South Alabama, I think this is their toughest opponent, but Carter Bradley, 296 passing yards per game on 33 attempts. You would expect the efficiency to decline here. Somewhat mobile with 18 yards. I don't want to stack Bradley, but what I'm trying to say is I think he's efficient enough. The offense is going to run enough plays and passing plays where you could maybe look at a run back in UCLA stacks, or if you're just looking for skinny stacks. Jalen Wayne's the wide receiver 1. He's averaging 10 targets per game, 96.5 receiving yards. Colin Lacey is the number 2, 6.5 targets per game, 84.5 receiving yards. He's a better play over receiver 3, Devin Voisin, but I think you could play Voisin at 3,800 as a pivot off Lacey. He's on the field just as much. If you examine routes run, Lacey, Wayne, and Voisin are the clear top 3 receivers, and they are not rotating anyone else really on the field whatsoever. Tight end is a rotation. Ignore everyone else. Stick to Lacey, Wayne, and Voisin. In the running back room, LaDamian Webb. This guy has been awesome so far to start the year. He has a good workload. He's seen 18 and 19 carries in back-to-back games. He's over 20 touches. He has exactly 21 touches, actually, in both games, averaging 21.5 per game. 21 per game. He's also averaging 95 yards on the ground, and he's giving you another 24 receiving yards per game through the air. Again, he'll be contrarian because they're big underdogs. 15.5 points is the spread, but he's in play. Terrion Avery's just a change of pace at this point. UCLA, they held out a lot of guys last week because of injury, some precautionary. Dorian Thompson-Robinson exited the game early, so it's really, and again, precautionary. He's going to play. It's really hard to look at his stats this year. What I'm going to say is he's been efficient as a passer, and he's an awesome runner. You can play Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Don't be scared off by his start to this year. It's going to get better in more competitive games. Zach Charbonnet, he just flat out didn't play in week 2. Makes sense. He saw 21 carries, and I mean, this guy's 5 targets in week 1 against Bowling Green. This guy is awesome. Charbonnet, I think you could at least argue he's the number 1 running back price-adjusted play on this slate. 26 touches in week 1, 111 rushing yards, another 36 receiving yards. He should have entered the NFL draft last year. This guy is just flat out awesome. TJ Hart and Keegan Jones, these guys are change of paces. Charbonnet is the guy. At receiver, a lot of players are coming back from injury from this team. I do think Casimir Allen retains his role, 8.5 targets per game, 57.5 yards. That should rise with more competitive games. But then I'm not sure who the wide receiver 2 is for UCLA. Cam Brown is returning from injury, allegedly. He hasn't played yet this year. He was listed as a starter on the depth chart. And then their other starter was Jake Bobo. If you look at Bobo's, he's the Duke transfer, by the way. If you look at Bobo's routes, they're full-time player routes. I mean, this guy's on the field a majority of snaps. He had a 77% route rate last week, but he only has 6 targets. He's behind Keegan Jones, the running back. He's behind Josiah Norwood. I'm going to put my chips on Casimir Allen, Jake Bobo, and then Cam Brown being the 3 starting receivers, with Michael Ezike working in a timeshare with Hudson Habermel at tight end. I wouldn't really try to bank on Michael Ezike getting 6 targets again like he did in week 1. I think Habermel is going to be involved. So I'm going to rank these guys. Number 1, Allen. Number 2, Bobo. Number 3, Cam Brown for the moment. Probably just going to run DTR naked or use Charbonnet out of this game. Cal Notre Dame, we won't spend too much time here. 41 total. Cal is a 15-point implied team total. Jack Plummer's not mobile, and he's reliant on a ton of attempts. He has not been efficient. 273 passing yards per game on 73 attempts. Just not worthwhile. Notre Dame is one of the better defenses he's faced too. Cal barely got by UNLV last week. This Cal team's not using their best playmaker either. Freshman Jaden Ott is the only one showing any explosiveness in the run game. He has 159 run yards over DeCarlos Brooks at 57, Damian Moore at 32, but they're insistent on the timeshare. Maybe it changes, but for right now, Jaden Ott is firmly just a GPP dart. They do use 3 receivers, and that's it. It is Jeremiah Hunter, J. Michael Sturdivant, and Marvin Anderson. I think prices are efficient here. I'm going to either just go up to Hunter, who has the most receiving yards. He's averaging 78.5 per game. Or, I mean, you don't really have to make a big decision between Sturdivant and Anderson. They're 36 and 3,500. Either way, neither are particularly strong plays in what should be a slow, inefficient game on both sides. I don't think you can use anyone on Notre Dame right now. Drew Pine's the new signal caller. He's a pocket statue, so he changes the complexion of the offense. They should pass more, and in passing sets, you're not going to see as many scrambles as you saw with Buckner. They use 3 running backs, Estime, Diggs, and Tyree. Tyree's the pass catcher, but none of them are viable. No one even has 100 rushing yards yet this year. The leading rusher among running backs is Estime at 54. Egregious. They have 2 efficient receivers in Michael Mayer, Lorenzo Styles. Mayer is averaging 10 targets per game, but now he's priced up at 56. It's a far cry from the 3.7 or whatever he was last week. With inefficient quarterback play, he's just GPP viable now. And then Lorenzo Styles, targets have been volatile for him. He only has 11 targets on the year. Even though he's efficient, I still don't want to play him. The other 2 receivers, if you are so inclined, are Braden Lenzy, Jaden Thomas. They're not rotating, but these guys are not good. Penn State, Auburn, 48.5 total, 3-point spread. Not the best game environment here. We're expecting not as much offensive efficiency. Auburn's good on defense, so that kind of makes sense. Penn State is up-tempo and pass-heavy, but at what point do we see Drew Allar? He's starting to appear in games. Clifford, he's been up and down. He's still struggling with injuries. He formerly was mobile, but he's now wearing a big, bulky knee brace, and he's been banged up in the lower body, so I question his mobility. He's going to need elevated attempts and efficiency to pay off that DK salary. There's just better options than Clifford, in my opinion, in this game environment specifically. Again, it's not against Purdue, it's against Auburn, and the total is far lower. If you do want to play a Penn State player, I'm inclined to play Mitchell Tinsley, 17 targets on the year, 111 yards. Again, not the most efficient, and I don't honestly know I'm going to play anyone on Penn State. Keandre Lambert-Smith and Parker Washington round out 3 wide receiver sets. Harrison Wallace has played a lot recently. Now, in their most recent game, bad opponent on the other side. They crushed Ohio, but he had 7 targets. Now, did that come in blowouts? Well, not really. 5 of those 7 targets came with the Clifford group. I'm not sure if Harrison Wallace is carving out a role for himself or what, but it just adds more volatility to Penn State. The one player I might take some shots on is Nick Singleton. In week 1, they used a 3-back committee. In week 2, they reduced it to 2 backs. They essentially removed Kayvon Lee from the offense for good reason. And Nick Singleton showed off why he was the number 1 recruit in this class at the running back position. He now has 210 rushing yards to Katron Allen's 54. Again, this is a player just entering his 3rd game in his career. So do they continue to use the timeshare just because you have veterans behind him? Or do they unleash the new freshman shiny toy, even though he might not be fully acclimated to the offense? Based on the chance they might unleash him, I'm going to play a little bit of Nick Singleton, but not a ton. He's going to still be risky until we see a larger sample of Penn State committing to him, and we haven't even seen that yet. Auburn, okay. TJ Finley has been dreadful. He has a negative touchdown to interception ratio, and they've played 1 an FCS team and then San Jose State. Now they're playing Penn State, the best pass defense they've faced thus far. Auburn's going to try to run the ball. You've also seen them implement Robbie Ashford. You're not playing any signal caller for Auburn. You're probably not playing any pass catchers either. Jarvarius Johnson leads the team with 9 targets. 9 targets is egregious. 158 yards. And now you're getting back Malcolm Johnson from injury. So not only is it, okay, they've been rotating players to begin with between Jarvarius Johnson, Shedrick Jackson, Tarvarius Dawson, Coy Moore. Now you get Malcolm Johnson back. And then they have a highly involved tight end, John Samuel Schenker. The only guy I'm confident in the routes is Samuel Schenker right now. He's 3,600, but you're not playing him. In the backfield, we know Auburn's going to try to run. They have a 1-2 punch between Tank Bigsby, Jarquez Hunter. Think of Bigsby as the 1A, Hunter as the 1B. They're both explosive and efficient. Bigsby is the guy they have leaned on in the past in some of these tight games. So splitting the difference, I'll play Bigsby. And I think he is somewhat worthwhile because we have seen 20, 25 touch upside and incredible efficiency from him. Unfortunately, early returns have been poor on him this year. He's averaging under 3 yards. After contact per attempt, you're just going to need more if you're looking at a guy like Bigsby who's expected to carry this team. GPP viable. Vanderbilt, Northern Illinois, sneaky shootout spot. Northern Illinois doesn't play defense. Don't be fooled. Their numbers this year are inflated by poor competition. Not even inflated. They're allowing over 10 yards per pass attempt. Last year, they were bottom 5 in yards per carry allowed to opposing offenses. This Northern Illinois defense is crap. Now, Vanderbilt just benched Mike Wright in their most recent game. He's going to start here, but what is his leash like? I have significant concerns. And I mean, he deserved to be benched. That was an atrocious performance. But if you get full run out of Mike Wright, he is extremely mobile. He already has 264 rushing yards on the year, not giving you much as a passer. That is true. But He's a glorified running back there. The job concern is enough to make me weary. In the backfield, Raymond Davis has been the bell cow back. He has 56 touches. He's averaging 18.7 per game. He's somebody you can play based on matchup here. Northern Illinois has a terrible run defense. Your only concern is Rocco Griffin might return, and Griffin was sort of a change of pace early in the year. Again, I think Davis has been productive enough where you could look to him. He's also involved in the pass game, 9 targets. He's their third most targeted player. Among the receivers, again, just dual threat signal callers here, Mike Wright. AJ Swan actually is a pretty good pocket passer. He's not as mobile, but you certainly would want Swan to play if you're playing a pass catcher. I think Shepard and McGowan are the only 2 guys you can look to right now. They're rotating the wide receiver 3. Quincy Skinner is still not back from injury. He's not going to play here. Devin Bodie just has about a 50% route rate because they use 2 tight ends a lot. But even those players are split. They're using 3 of them. So it's just Shepard. It's just McGowan. I'll take Shepard. He's the more targeted player here, even though the efficiency hasn't quite been there. With that said, I'm probably not playing a Vandy pass catcher altogether. Just give me Ray Davis or bust. NIU's favored in this game by 2.5 points. Vandy's defense hasn't necessarily scared you either. They've played weak competition. Rocky Lombardi is the most confusing signal caller on the slate. He has an egregious price, but he really needs these shootout environments to coax out a ceiling of him. I'm going to bring up some what I think are pretty egregious stats by Rocky Lombardi in the past. If you look at his overall body of work, Rocky Lombardi, he's somewhat efficient, but this comes again in these shootout environments. Last year, he threw for over 300 yards twice, but he fell below 200 yards 8 times. He also rushed for at least 90 yards twice, but he fell below 30 rushing yards 9 times. More times than not, they're using him as a game manager. You do have the potential for spike performances, but again, those are coming against like Kent State, some of these middling MAC teams, not SEC defenses. Vanderbilt's the bottom of the SEC, but I still think they're better than those teams. I'm going to fade Rocky Lombardi. The backfield has been reduced to a 3-way committee. Ontario Brown has 33 touches, Harrison Whaley 20, and Mason Blakemore 19. Making matters worse, Blakemore is the leading pass catcher among the backfield. Really hard to play them at these prices. If you do target a receiver, it's going to be Cole Tucker or Shamar Thornton for me. Tucker is easily the wide receiver 1, averaging 95 yards per game, but Thornton's not too far behind, 56 yards per game. I'm not considering anyone else. It's a rotation at tight end and wide receiver 3. Colorado taking on Minnesota, another game we can essentially breeze through. 47 total, 28-point spread. Minnesota is the only team to talk about here. Colorado did commit to JT Shrout. Great. He played terribly. He could get benched at any point. Their leading receiver has 10 targets. So not only is this a horrific offense, but they're rotating pass catchers. No, thank you. Rotating running backs as well between Fontenot and Smith. If I'm playing any one of the pass catchers, it's tight end Brady Russell. He's rotating the least. Minnesota. I actually like the OC. Shiraka's back. We saw Tanner Morgan with his best seasons under Shiraka. It's just they have such a heavy run rate where they're going to need competitive games. So, like, I want to target this Minnesota passing attack against Purdue, not against Colorado. So Tanner Morgan's a fade. He's not mobile. Their receiving core is actually efficient. Like, I like these guys in a vacuum. Chris Ottman-Bell, Mike Brown-Stevens, Dylan Wright, tight end Brevin Spanford. They're all pretty efficient here. It's just Chris Ottman-Bell has 11 targets on the year. Everyone else is in single digits, and they've played 2 games. Like, you might be able to predict if Ottman-Bell scores a touchdown, and if he does, is that even enough to pay off that price tag? I don't think so. So I'm going to fade this passing attack. But Mo Ibrahim, 21 carries, 22 carries. This is the most competitive game Minnesota maybe's played this year, and they've shown no reluctance coming off the Achilles to use a change, or they've shown no desire to use a change of pace coming off the Achilles. Like, they're going to run Mo Ibrahim a lot in the beginning of games, and then they'll just use Potts and Bryce Williams to salt the game away at the end. Ibrahim has legitimate 40-touch upside if games remain competitive. The issue is it's a 28-point spread here, so you're still probably locking Ibrahim into the 20 to 25 touch category, which is, I personally don't think, quite enough work to pay off a 9,400 price tag. You can get plenty of guys with similar touch projections at a fraction of this cost, but he has as much upside as anyone on the slate. Mississippi State taking on Georgia Tech, 65. Not Mississippi State. That's on the night game. Ole Miss, the Miss confused me. Normally I write Ole, but excuse me. It is Ole Miss taking on Georgia Tech. Good total here at 65. 16.5-point spread in favor of Ole Miss. They have the highest implied team total on the board. They've been rotating their quarterbacks. Dart got a start. Altmaier got a start. Altmaier got hurt. Dart has also been more efficient. I think Dart gets the start. I think Dart is their quarterback the rest of the way. Dart is semi-mobile. He's going to benefit from this up-tempo Ole Miss offense. They are run-heavy, but they run so many raw plays that Dart is going to have as many opportunities to pass the ball and hit 300-yard bonuses as anyone else. He's just really expensive here on DK. 9K. You're not really looking at Dart outside of the most contrarian builds. I'm going to look to target him in future weeks. Hopefully, we can see them roll Georgia Tech, maybe get Altmaier the game a little bit, drop that price on Dart. In the run game, when games are competitive, you're going to see Evans and Judkins as the 1-2 punch here. Zach Evans, the TCU transfer. He's averaging 91.5 yards per game on the ground. Excellent pass catcher is Evans. And he's a guy that has a 7.0 career yards per carry average. Don't make too much of this small sample. He is their lead back when healthy. You are also going to see Quinshon Judkins active, though, too. He's been awesome in a small sample. They're freshmen. Completely beat out Ulysses Bentley. He actually is outgained Zach Evans on the ground. I do think this is a 1A, 1B situation, maybe like a 60-40 split Evans to Judkins. They're both viable here. Judkins at 3,500. He could be your salary saver at running back. I would expect 10 to 15 touches from him. Highly efficient play against Georgia Tech. In the past game, Jonathan Mingo is the wide receiver one. Make no mistake about it. 129 yards for him in non-competitive games so far. He's just going to be more active when games are closer. Michael Trigg, the receiving tight end they got from USC, has 12 targets. That leads the team. His route rates have been excellent to start the year. I think he might even be their pass catcher too when it's all said and done. We'll need to see how things shake out against more competition. But Trigg, early returns are pretty good on him. Outside of that, you're looking at a three-way rotation for wide receiver 2 and 3 between J.J. Henry. His route rates are 49%, 34%. Malik Heath, 50%, 57%. And Jalen Robinson, 47%, 57%. I know Heath and Robinson are productive players because of their previous schools. I'll take shots on these two. Robinson significantly cheaper at 4,900. I think you can play him over Heath right now. And Flat and I would just play Mingo over both. Trigg would be my next play. Price adjusted, it goes Mingo then Trigg. Georgia Tech, hard to target this team right now. We actually saw them hang with Clemson for about 3 quarters before the wheels fell off. Jeff Sims hasn't been efficient really in his entire career. He is mobile. He's going to get you somewhere between like 45 and 60 yards on the ground, but he offers such little viability as a passer, and this Ole Miss defense is underrated. I'm not going to be playing Sims. Backfield is split between Dante Smith, Dylan McDuffie, and Hassan Hall. 3-way committee is not something I want to target as a 16.5-point underdog. In the receiving game, maybe you could look to a run back here because Georgia Tech actually has a pretty good implied team total of 24.25, so they should score some points. It's just really hard to predict who it's going to be. Again, Smith, McDuffie, Hall in the backfield, plus Sims is active as a rusher. In the receiving room, Nate McCullum, EJ Jenkins, and Malachi Carter lead the team in targets, but McCollum has 10 targets on the year. He's averaging 35.5 receiving yards. I'm probably going to take shots on McCollum at 3,900 and Carter at 46, but you're looking really dicey here, as well as Sims, man. You're just relying on the rushing ability. Even though the implied team total is somewhat high, it's tough for me to get to these guys given their rotations across the board. BYU, Oregon, 58 total, 3.5-point spread in favor of the Ducks. Pretty good total here. I actually kind of like the over for a couple reasons. Oregon actually moved the ball fairly well, and Bonex threw a couple of picks in Georgia territory. They turned the ball over there, missed a field goal. Just a lot of mess for Oregon when they got inside Georgia territory. But Jaron Hall, I got to commend him for what he's done considering both Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney have been injured. Jaron Hall averaging 261 pass yards per game, 43 rushing yards on the ground. Cumulative this year, we know he's mobile. He's going to pass the ball a fair amount in this game. They have a 52% pass rate. My main worry is, can they get it done again with just Chase Roberts? He saw 12 targets, 122 receiving yards, 8 catches in their last game. He's excellent. I'm happy they found him to step up here because now they have 3 legit receivers. But if Romney and Nahua miss this game, like I am just worried about the explosiveness of the offense in general. Still, I was worried about him against Baylor. It's tough to play these pass catchers. It's Chase Roberts or bust, and he would be a heightened play in DFS if Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney miss. He's 3,200, so if you could slot him into that wide receiver 1 role at 3,200, very interested. If 1 or 2 of those guys are back, I would be less interested. The backfield's a committee between Christopher Brooks and Lopini Katoa. You can just find better price-adjusted plays in them. They're both expensive. Oregon, this might sound crazy, but I am somewhat interested in Bo Nix this week. 5,500. And again, this team moved the ball against Georgia. Now, pick six Bo Nix, he committed a couple turnovers that stymied their drives, but even if they turn into field goals, I think you'd consider that a win. You just have to deal with the erratic play of Nix. The positives: one, he did move the ball against Georgia. He's moved the ball in the past. He's competent under center if he's not throwing the ball to the other team. He's mobile. He has 55 rushing yards this year. We've seen him produce solid games on the ground already. This game has a decent total. Oregon's implied team totals are over 30. So yes, BYU's defense has been good, but it's not getting maybe the respect it deserves in the betting markets. I think you could take shots with Nix. At least I don't hate it. He's not my least favorite quarterback here. The backfield's a disaster. They're using 5 players. And maybe this gets chopped down to 3 or 4 in competitive games. But even against Georgia, no one over 10 touches. I have a lot of questions here. If I am playing one, it's Byron Cardwell. I think the main backs in this team will be Marquise Irving, Noah Whittington, Byron Cardwell. Sean Dodge is probably involved too, but he's playing a lot of receiver. All right. Receivers. They've been rotating, just like running back. I do think Troy Franklin's the wide receiver 1. 6 targets per game, 59 yards. Routes do indicate he's one of the full-time receivers. He was at 76% against Georgia, dropped down in their most recent game. The other full-time player was Chase Cota, the UCLA transfer, 81%. I'm going to look to him as well. Nobody else was above 50% among the receivers. Sevin McGee, 47%. Dante Thornton, 33%. Now, one of these guys could emerge. I would put my money on Thornton, if anyone, but Troy Franklin and Chase Cota are the only guys with route rates north of 75%, and that came against Georgia. I'll just focus on Cota at min or Troy Franklin at 49. I think they're fine. Last game, Kansas, Houston, and we saved a good one for last. This one has been taking money towards the over. It's listed at 56.5 on the screen. It's rising. 8.5 point spread in favor of Houston. Neither team has shown the ability to play defense, and believe it or not, Kansas has the number 1 scoring offense in the country right now. They played West Virginia too. These didn't come against Bowling Greens. They didn't come against Akrons. They didn't come against FCS teams. They played West Virginia, a legitimate team. Now, is that going to continue against Houston? Houston's defense has shown cracks early in the year. Jalen Daniels has solid dual threat ability, 114 yards so far. He's been competent as a passer. He's never going to quarterback this voluminous Kansas State offense. They're going to be a little bit slower, fairly run heavy, but they've been efficient. And rather than target Daniels, I think Daniels is playable in GPPs, but I'm willing to get to some of these pass catchers as one-offs, as run backs, to Houston stacks. Luke Grimm is the wide receiver 1. He's not priced like it. 7 targets in their most recent game, 93 yards. He's at 5,100. You have Lawrence Arnold as the wide receiver 2, 10 targets for him on the year. I think he's fine. Quentin Skinner's the 3. They don't rotate a ton here either. So Quentin Skinner's a burner. We saw him with a huge reception in week 1. I actually like Skinner a little bit as a pivot here, but Grimm's my favorite. The backfield's a little harder to evaluate. It was cut down to 2 players last week. Sevion Morrison and Kai Thomas were kind of removed from the rotation, but Daniel Highshaw and Devin Neal, 10 carries apiece. Daniels is just so involved on the ground that it's kind of a 3-way committee regardless. This 12 carry mark you see on the screen here, I'll just reference this late in the show. For quarterbacks, these are designed rush attempts. So you'll notice this 15 attempt total doesn't match up with opportunities. That's because we're talking about designed rushing attempts here. Daniels, to his credit, this offensive line's actually played well. He's taken no sacks, and he's actually only scrambled once. 15 of his 16 carries have been designed, which is key. It means it's a part of the offense. It's not as volatile as some other quarterbacks on this slate who really rely on scrambles. Daniels has designed rush attempts. Anyway, more of a 3-way committee because of that. For Houston, Clayton Tune, he's kind of put the team on his back a little bit here. He's not been the most efficient passer, but I think that kind of positively regresses. Only 236 yards per game through the air, 35.5 attempts. He's just been better than this throughout his career. I expect it to regress. They've had a couple tough games to start the year too. 46 rushing yards, that's kind of what we expect. Sort of depressed last year. His rushing ability was depressed, that is. He suffered a hamstring injury in week 2, so we never saw him kind of get back to that upside we've seen in previous seasons. I am interested in Brandon Campbell. This team seems to have gotten rid of Tazon Henry and Stacey Sneed to some degree. Tazon Henry was banged up in their last game, so there's a little bit of noise here. Maybe it's still a timeshare, but Campbell, he's now received 15 and 16 carries. He's averaging 19 touches per game. He's their third leading target getter on the team. He has 7 targets through 2 games, 64 receiving yards. He's averaging 32 receiving yards per game. This is really good receiving production for the USC transfer. As 8.5-point favorites against Kansas in a game with an awesome total, I'm going to certainly be putting in a little bit of Brandon Campbell into my lineups. And I'm also going to sprinkle in Nathaniel Dell and Matthew Golden. These guys have been the clear 1-2 in this offense with a strong preference to Dell. He's averaging 8.5 targets per game, 85 yards. He exploded in week 2. We know what he did last year. Dell is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. He's a fine target if you're paying up. Golden, their 4-star receiver freshman. He's playing a lot. He's growing into a role. He has 9 targets on the year. If you want to look for a double stack, I think he's your preferred guy. But you also have Joseph Manjack, and I only bring him up because he has taken on a larger role in the offense. His route rates increased drastically week 1 to week 2, and that came at the expense of Keyshawn Carter and Samuel Brown. Overall, his route rate jumped from 47.5% to 72%. Again, coming at the expense of those 2 players. Last guy to mention is receiving tight end Christian Trahan, 4,100, just 5 targets. I'd rather play Matthew Golden for 100 more. I think I'd rather play Joseph Manjack at the same price compared to Christian Trahan at this point. But that's the slate. I'm sure I missed something. So as we head out of here, leave a comment if I did. If you have a question about somebody, leave a comment. I will make sure to get back to you guys down there. Also hit the thumbs up button while you're at it. Excuse me. And if you want to reach out on Twitter, my name is Matt Kajeski. You can find me at Matt_Kajeski. Thank you guys for watching. Long video today, but I really appreciate breaking these down for you guys. We'll see you again next time. Have a good one.